In the winter of 1972, inside a rented gymnasium on the eastern edge of Hong Kong's Kowloon district, the air carried the specific weight of a room that had been worked in for hours. Rubber mats covered the floor in overlapping squares. A single row of overhead lights ran the length of the ceiling, casting a flat, even brightness over everything below. There were 11 people in that gymnasium. 11 people who would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe what they saw in the next 6 seconds. Most of them would fail. His name was Alexei Voronov. He was 26 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and 219 pounds of something that had been built through cold and repetition rather than vanity. He had been the Soviet Sambo champion for 3 consecutive years. He had competed in 41 documented matches across 4 countries and had not lost a single one. Not one. His record was not a streak, it was a statement. Coaches in Leningrad called him the cleanest takedown artist they had ever produced. His grip strength had been measured at the Soviet Sports Institute in Moscow at 143 kilograms per hand. His finishing throw, a lateral hip rotation that began low and ended with a man's world turned upside down, had put 17 opponents on their backs in competitive settings. It had put 2 of them in hospital. He had arrived in Hong Kong 3 weeks earlier on a cultural exchange program that had nothing to do with culture. He was there to study. He was there to evaluate. He had heard the name that everyone in martial arts was hearing in 1972, and he had come to form his own opinion. In the next 6 seconds, that opinion would be revised. Nobody in that gymnasium understood what they were standing inside. Nobody in that room knew that the quiet man sitting on a folding chair near the back wall, in a gray t-shirt and dark trousers and shoes that had no business being on a training floor, was about to demonstrate something that could not be taught in any sports institute in any country on earth. They were about to watch 6 seconds that would be carried forward through 40 years of whispered conversations in training halls from Moscow to Manila. Stay until the end. The sentence Bruce Lee would speak from the floor of that gymnasium would change Alexei Voronov's understanding of what a human body was capable of. He never stopped talking about it. He talked about it until the last year of his life. Alexei Voronov had not come to Hong Kong looking for trouble. That matters. It needs to be said clearly. He was not a bully, he was not reckless. He was a disciplined, serious man who had given his 20s to a sport that asked for everything, and gave back very little outside of pain and a kind of private certainty that most people never develop. He had earned every credential he carried. The technique was real. The record was real. The confidence was not arrogance so much as it was the natural result of being the best at a thing for longer than anyone around him could remember. But there was a question he could not answer from a distance, and it had been troubling him since the previous year, when a training partner had returned from a film set in Hong Kong with a story that Voronov had dismissed, and then found himself unable to stop thinking about. The story was about a man who moved in ways that the training partner could not account for using the vocabulary of any martial system he had studied. He had watched the man work. He had tried to follow what the man's hands were doing and reported that it was not possible to follow them. He had reported this with the flat, unembarrassed honesty of a Soviet athlete who had been trained since childhood to observe and report without embellishment. Voronov had listened. He had said nothing. For 11 months he had said nothing. Then he had applied for the exchange program. He arrived on a Tuesday in late November. He spent the first 10 days watching. He visited 3 schools. He attended a public demonstration. He observed training sessions at 2 facilities connected to the Hong Kong film industry, where the stunt coordinators worked with the kind of controlled brutality that serious film production in that era required. What he saw was technically competent. Some of it was impressive. None of it answered his question. On the 14th day, through an introduction arranged by a martial arts instructor who moved between the film world and the competition world with equal ease, Voronov was invited to observe a private training session. The address was the gymnasium on the eastern edge of Kowloon. He arrived at 6 in the evening. He sat down on one of the folding chairs near the back wall and he waited. The other people in the gymnasium were a mixture. There was a stunt coordinator named Wei Jianhong who had been in the industry for 9 years and had worked on 4 productions of increasing complexity. There were 2 of Wei's assistants, Both young, both quiet, both positioned near the equipment bags along the side wall. There was a film producer named Raymond Chow, who was standing near the door with his jacket still on, as though he had not yet decided how long he intended to stay. There was a journalist whose name has been rendered differently in every account of this evening. There was a young man from the production company who had been sent to take notes, and who would later say that he stopped taking notes within the first 30 seconds and did not pick up his pen again. And there was a man in a gray t-shirt sitting on a chair near the equipment table at the far end of the room, reading something. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed approximately 135 pounds. He was 31 years old. He had taken his shoes off at the door and left them there without ceremony. He was reading with the particular quality of concentration that belongs to people who are accustomed to being in rooms where other people are watching them and have made a private decision not to participate in being watched. He did not look up when Voronov entered. He turned a page. Voronov sat down. He watched. For 40 minutes he observed the man in the gray t-shirt work through a private training session with the 2 assistants, who served more as equipment than as partners, catching kicks on padded surfaces held at precise heights and angles, feeding jabs and crosses at varied speeds and distances on instruction. What Voronov saw in those 40 minutes reorganized certain assumptions he had spent years building. He was a technical observer. He had an eye trained by thousands of hours of serious competition. He understood what he was watching, and what he was watching did not fit neatly into any category he owned. The speed first, not the speed of the hands only, but the speed of the decision behind the hands. The interval between perception and response that every serious fighter understood as the true separator between levels. In Voronov's experience, that interval, even at the highest levels of competition, carried some measurable weight. There was always some moment, however brief, between seeing and doing. He watched for that moment in the man in the gray t-shirt and could not find it. He looked for it with the focused attention of someone who has been paid, in a sense, to find exactly that kind of thing, and it was not there. The footwork, second, not elaborate, not decorative. The minimum necessary movement to be where the other person's force was not, arrived at through a geometry that Voronov could observe but could not predict, even knowing what he was looking for, even watching a second and a third time as the same sequences were repeated at the assistant's request. After 40 minutes, the training session ended. The assistants stepped back. The man in the gray t-shirt picked up a towel from the equipment table. He sat down again. Raymond Chow said something from the doorway. The man in the gray t-shirt said something in return that was too quiet for Voronov to hear from the back wall. What happened next has been described in 4 separate accounts, each from a different person who was present. The accounts agree on the sequence. They disagree on the interval between the moment Voronov stood up and the moment the session began. Some say 3 minutes, some say 8. The journalist's account, the most detailed, says 5. Voronov stood up from his folding chair. He introduced himself through the mutual contact who had arranged the invitation. He explained his background without embellishment. He said that he had come from the Soviet Union specifically to study what was being developed in Hong Kong, and that he was having difficulty evaluating what he was observing from a seated position. He said this with complete courtesy. He said that he wondered whether the man in the gray t-shirt would be willing to demonstrate the principles he had been working on against a partner with genuine resistance behind him. He said that he would provide that resistance. He said all of this calmly. There was no challenge in his voice. There was only the specific intellectual seriousness of a man who wanted an answer to a question and was asking directly for it. The man in the gray t-shirt set the towel down. He looked at Voronov for a moment. He looked at him with the attentiveness that a craftsman applies to a problem he finds genuinely interesting rather than threatening. He said, "All right, that was the whole sentence." 2 words, delivered without particular emphasis, the way a carpenter might agree to look at a door someone was having trouble with. If you want to find out what happened in the next 6 seconds, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. This channel carries these stories so they are not lost. The 2 men moved to the center of the gymnasium. They stood 8 feet apart on the rubber mats. Voronov removed his outer layer and set it over the back of his chair. He rolled his neck twice, left and right. He dropped his weight slightly, settling into the low-rooted stance that had been the foundation of his competitive work for 6 years. He was not nervous. This was important. He was not performing confidence. He simply was not nervous, in the specific way that elite competitors are not nervous, because the body they are in has been through too many difficult situations to treat this particular moment as anything other than information to be gathered. He was curious. He was alert. He was ready. The man in the gray t-shirt walked to the center of the room and stood there. He did not lower his stance. He did not raise his hands into a formal guard. He stood with a quality of ease that Wei Jianhong, the stunt coordinator, would describe in his own account 20 years later as the kind of ease that a man carries not when he is relaxed, but when there is no gap between what he intends to do and his ability to do it. His hands were at his sides. His weight was balanced. He looked at Voronov with the same attentiveness he had been giving the page he was reading an hour earlier. This is what needs to be understood about distance before what happened next can mean anything. Distance is not the space between two bodies. Distance is a negotiation. It is a language spoken entirely in the feet and the hips. In the half step and the quarter turn and the slight shift of weight backward or forward that a serious practitioner uses to control the terms of an exchange without throwing a single technique. The man who controls distance does not fight his opponent's fight. He fights his own fight, in his own geometry, on ground he has selected. Every other skill in the martial arts, every throw, every strike, every takedown is downstream of this. Voronov knew this. He had built a career on a version of it. What he had not yet encountered was someone who operated in a different dimension of the same principle. The two men stood there for a moment that Wei Jianhong would later describe as the specific silence of a room when the floor of what is happening drops several levels below where everyone expected it to be. The film producer had stopped talking. The young note-taker had put his pen against the pad and left it there. The assistants were still. The journalist had tilted forward in his chair by approximately 3 inches, which was the maximum forward tilt the account recorded. Voronov moved first. Second one, Voronov initiated with a level change, a compression of his entire frame downward and forward that was the entry point for the lateral hip rotation that had finished 17 competitive matches. It began correctly. The angle was right. The weight distribution was right. The commitment was total. He had thrown this technique in conditions more pressured than this one, and it had never failed to close the distance it was aimed at. The man in the gray t-shirt was not there. This needs to be understood precisely. He was not there in the specific sense that the space Voronov's entry was aimed at had been vacated by approximately 14 inches to the left and slightly forward, in a movement that the journalist would describe as containing less visible effort than walking through a doorway. No step back. No dramatic evasion. A lateral adjustment of the kind that belongs to a different order of spatial awareness, executed at a speed that did not allow Voronov's nervous system the time it would have needed to account for it. Voronov's entry found nothing. Second two, Voronov's training took over. This is what serious training does. It removes the pause between failure and response. He had not found his takedown entry, but his weight was committed and his frame was low, and from that position he shifted his grip search to Voronov's outer sleeve line, which was the secondary entry he had drilled for exactly this kind of miss. His hands moved toward the grip position. They did not arrive. The man in the gray t-shirt's left hand was already there, not blocking, not parrying. There is a distinction that matters here. A block is reactive. What happened to Voronov's sleeve grip was something different, a redirect that changed the direction of his committed reach by enough degrees that the grip he was looking for was now on the wrong side of his own center line, which meant that his base was exposed and his recovery time was extended. Wei Jianhong, standing near the side wall with both hands folded in front of him, uncrossed his hands. He did not move them again. He stood with them at his sides for the remaining 4 seconds. He would say later that he uncrossed his hands because his body understood what it was watching before his mind had processed it, and that it felt inappropriate to be standing in a casual posture during what was happening. Second 3. Voronov recovered. This was the part of the account that impressed the journalist most, because the journalist had trained for 7 years and knew what recovery looked like when it was real. Voronov's recovery was real. He reset his base. He reset his hands. He did not chase. He looked. He was recalibrating. He was taking in new information and adjusting his model, in a competitive setting, against anyone he had faced before. The interval between his reset and his next entry would have been enough. The interval was there. The interval was genuine. It was not enough. Second 4. The man in the gray t-shirt moved. The journalist's account breaks down here, as does Wei's, as does the young note-taker's who had put down his pen to watch, and would later say he wished he hadn't, because without the pen in his hand he had nothing to do with the feeling of what he was seeing, and that feeling needed somewhere to go. All three accounts agree that the movement was forward. All three accounts agree that it was fast. Beyond that, the accounts diverge in their vocabulary because the vocabulary available to people observing this kind of speed at this kind of proximity is inadequate to the task. What is agreed upon is the result. Voronov's left side was not where Voronov expected it to be. Voronov's weight was not distributed the way Voronov's nervous system was tracking it. The mat, which had been below him, was now beside him and approaching. Second 5. Voronov went down. He did not go down the way people go down when they are thrown by someone trying to put them down hard. He went down the way water goes down a drain, following a path that had been prepared for it. He landed on his back on the rubber mat with his arms out, and his training took over one more time, and he slapped the mat with the left arm in the Brechful reflex that had saved him from injury in training for 6 years. The slap was the loudest sound in the gymnasium. It was the loudest sound anyone present would remember from that evening. The young note-taker would say later that the slap was like a period at the end of a sentence he had not known was being written. Second 6. The man in the gray t-shirt was standing 8 inches from Voronov's right shoulder. He was looking down. His hands were at his sides. He was not breathing in any way that was visible. His expression was the same expression he had been wearing when he was reading. He crouched down. He was now at eye level with Voronov, who was on his back on the mat looking at the ceiling and then looking at the man crouching beside him. The man in the gray t-shirt extended his right hand, open, palm up. The gesture was not theatrical. It was the same gesture a person uses to help someone up from a stumble on a pavement. Voronov looked at the hand for a moment. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the hand again. He took it. The man in the gray t-shirt helped him to his feet with the easy, unbothered strength of someone returning a borrowed object. Voronov stood. He was not injured. He stood on the mat and oriented himself in the room. The gymnasium was very quiet. Raymond Chow had not moved from the door. Wei Jianhong's hands were still at his sides. The journalist's pen was somewhere on the floor. The man in the gray t-shirt said something. He said it quietly, the way he said everything, at a volume that required Voronov to be close to hear it. The two of them stood together in the center of the room, and the man spoke 3 sentences directly to Voronov, and those 3 sentences were not heard by anyone else in the gymnasium. What was said between them in those 3 sentences has never been fully established. Voronov would speak about that evening many times over the following decades. And he would describe the 6 seconds with careful detail every time, and he would describe the hand extended from the crouch, and he would describe the quality of the silence in the room. He never repeated the 3 sentences. He said once, in an interview conducted in 1998 in a sports journal in St. Petersburg, that the sentences were technical in nature. He said they contained information he had not been given in 6 years of elite competitive training. He said he spent the following 3 years finding out whether the information was correct. He said it was. Voronov stood at the center of the mat and made a choice. There was a version of that moment where he stepped back and said something about the mats being unfamiliar or the distance being unusual or some other explanation that would have been available to a man who needed one. That version existed. He did not take it. He stood on the mat and he said, in his careful English, that he had come from the Soviet Union with a question and that he had received his answer, and that the answer was not what he had expected. He said this without embarrassment. He said it with the specific dignity that belongs to people who value accuracy more than they value the appearance of certainty. Wei Jianhong, who was walking to the side wall to retrieve his jacket, stopped. He walked back. He put his hand briefly on Voronov's shoulder and then on the shoulder of the man in the gray t-shirt. He did not say anything. The touch confirmed that both men were real. that what had happened on the mat was real, that the room and everyone in it had witnessed something they would be responsible for carrying forward. The man in the gray t-shirt picked up his towel from the equipment table. He sat back down. He picked up the thing he had been reading. Raymond Chow left the gymnasium at 7:43 in the evening. The journalist left 12 minutes later, walking slowly, the specific slow walk of a person organizing a great deal of new information. The young note-taker found his pen on the floor near the chair leg and put it in his pocket without opening his pad. Alexei Voronov sat on the folding chair near the back wall for 20 minutes after everyone else had gone. He sat with his hands on his knees and looked at the rubber mats where the previous 35 minutes had taken place. Then he stood up, picked up his outer layer from the chair, and walked to the door. He looked back once from the doorway. The man in the gray t-shirt was still reading. The overhead lights were still casting their flat, even brightness over the mats. Outside in the street, traffic was moving through Kowloon at the ordinary pace of a winter evening. A truck moved a load of something through an intersection 2 blocks north. The city carried on with its work, indifferent to the specific reorganization of one man's understanding that had just taken place inside a rented gymnasium on its eastern edge. Voronov returned to the Soviet Union 6 days later. He continued to compete. He won 3 more major titles in the following 4 years. His coaches noted that his grip entry work changed in that period, that he became harder to commit in the way that champions sometimes become harder to commit when they have acquired a new piece of information about what they are afraid of. He never said what changed or why it changed. He carried the 3 sentences with him for the rest of his career and gave them to his own students in pieces, over years, without attribution. Wei Jianhong would go on to work on productions across 3 decades of Hong Kong cinema. In interviews across those decades, he was asked many questions. He answered most of them with the cheerful efficiency of a man who has done a great deal and does not attach more weight to any of it than it deserves. When he was asked about the gymnasium in Kowloon in the winter of 1972, he paused before answering. Every time. The pause was always the same length. Then he would say that he had seen many things in many settings and that 6 seconds in that gymnasium had more in them than most things he had witnessed in hours. The journalist's account was published in a small circulation martial arts magazine in 1974. It ran without photographs. It was read by approximately 400 people in its original printing. It was reprinted in a different publication in 1989 and read by more. It was translated into Japanese in 1993 and into Russian in 2001, where it was read by a retired competitive athlete in St. Petersburg who clipped it from the journal and kept it. The story moved through the world at the speed of truth, which is slower than the speed of rumor but more durable. Some versions of the story changed in transit. Some versions added a formal challenge and a wager. Some versions made the gymnasium larger and the crowd more numerous. Some versions gave Voronov lines of bravado before the match that the accounts suggest he did not speak. The story gathered these additions the way all true stories do when they travel far enough, accumulating the details that people feel the story deserves even when the actual events did not supply them. What stayed constant across every version was the number. 6 seconds. Nobody who touched the story changed the 6 seconds. There was something in that number that resisted alteration. It was too specific to be invented and too short to be misremembered. The man in the gray t-shirt continued his work. He made films, he taught, he wrote. He gave the system he had built a name and continued to refine it with the specific restlessness of someone who understood that a system is not a destination but a direction. He died in July of 1973 at 32 years old before the world had fully understood what it was losing. He never spoke publicly about the evening in the gymnasium. He gave hundreds of interviews in his life and spoke about his art and his philosophy and his work with the generosity of someone who genuinely wanted other people to understand what he understood. The gymnasium in Kowloon did not come up. It was not a story he appears to have told. It belonged to the other man. Some experiences are given to witnesses rather than participants, because the participant already knows the lesson and the witness is the one who needs it. What Alexei Voronov needed that evening on a rubber mat in Hong Kong was not humiliation. He was not humiliated. He was corrected. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. and the difference is located in the hand extended from a crouch at eye level, palm up, without theater or sentiment, offering to close the distance between the floor and standing. Correction assumes that the other person is worth correcting. It assumes that the error is recoverable and that the person who made it is capable of better. The most precise form of respect a master can offer is to show you, without softening it, exactly where your model of the world is wrong. The world does not pause to witness its own important moments. Traffic moves. Lights fall on floorboards. A truck carries its load through an intersection and no one on the truck knows what has just happened 6 blocks south. This is not indifference in the cruel sense. It is simply the scale at which the world operates, which is larger than any individual event and indifferent to all of them equally. What gives a moment its weight is not the world's attention but the attention of the people inside it, and what those people do with what they have seen. 11 people were inside that gymnasium in Kowloon in the winter of 1972. 11 people carried 6 seconds forward into the decades that followed. The story arrived here through their hands. Next week we are going to talk about the evening in 1969 when a Hollywood stunt coordinator with 15 years of film experience challenged Bruce Lee to demonstrate what his system could do against a man with real size behind him, and what the stunt coordinator told his wife when he arrived home that night, which is the part of the story that has never been included in any published account.